The morning sun filtered weakly through the enormous glass panels of Beijing Capital International Airport, its light fractured into long streaks across the polished marble floor. The terminal hummed with the restless rhythm of travel, the clattering of suitcase wheels, the clipped tones of flight announcements reverberating through high metal arches, the murmured exchanges of families, tourists, and business travelers. In that ceaseless flow of humanity moved a man who seemed to draw attention without trying. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and unmistakably confident. His skin was a deep, rich brown, luminous under the sterile airport lights. He wore a tailored gray suit that fit like armor, the fabric catching subtle glimmers as he walked. A dark tie was knotted neatly at his throat, and polished shoes tapped rhythmically against the floor. His hair was closely cropped, his beard trimmed with precision. On his wrist rested a sleek watch. Nothing ostentatious, but anyone who knew quality could see the craftsmanship. As he approached the signs marked First Class, Elite Members Only, the air seemed to shift around him. Conversations faltered. Eyes followed. It was not the appreciative gaze given to a man of elegance, but something sharper, colder. A woman in a silk jacket leaned toward her husband, her voice sharp in Mandarin but pitched just loud enough to be overheard. Impossible, look at him. Someone like that could never afford first class. Her husband smirked, the corners of his mouth curling. It's a scam. Wait and see. He probably bought a fake ticket online. The man heard them. Of course he did. He had spent years hearing whispers just like these in airports, restaurants, boardrooms, but his expression never shifted. He placed his leather carry-on by his feet, produced his passport and electronic ticket, and handed them across the counter. The young woman behind the check-in desk faltered. Her professional smile froze for a heartbeat, replaced by hesitation. Sir, are you sure this is your ticket? Yes, he said, his voice deep and steady, carrying both patience and authority. Please scan it. She slid it across the scanner. The device beeped, a green light flashing instantly. Valid. First class confirmed. She frowned, scanned again, as if the machine might correct itself and reveal the fraud she was certain existed. Again, green. Behind him, passengers muttered. One scoffed, I knew it. Fake. Another chuckled. He'll be embarrassed soon enough. Finally, the attendant had no choice. She forced a brittle smile. It's valid. Gate C12, boarding in 40 minutes. Enjoy your flight. The words were polite, but her tone was not. Even with the truth blinking green in front of her, she could not erase the doubt in her eyes. The man nodded once, collected his documents, and walked away. His stride was even, unbroken. He had long ago learned that dignity was something you carried inside you, not something others gave you. At the security checkpoint, the ordeal repeated itself. Guards lingered on him, their eyes sharp, their movements meticulous. His bag was opened, rifled through twice. He was asked to lift his arms again and again while the scanner buzzed indifferently. A businessman behind him sighed in irritation. Why do they let people like him in the first-class line? He slows everyone down. The black man turned slightly, his expression unreadable, his silence heavy. He had mastered silence long ago. It was sharper than words, heavier than retorts. Silence forced others to hear themselves. When he finally emerged from security, the lounge awaited him, gleaming with its polished marble floors, soft leather chairs, and chandeliers casting a golden glow. Staff in pressed uniforms bowed gently to each guest. Yet when he stepped inside, the temperature shifted, conversations dimmed, gazes flickered, some openly curious, others dripping with unspoken disdain. He chose a seat by the window, away from the central cluster of travelers. Pulling out his phone, he scrolled through a flood of messages, executive updates, strategic proposals, confidential reports. His fingers typed swiftly, answering in curt, precise phrases. If any of these onlookers could see the contents of his inbox, their assumptions would collapse instantly. But he knew better. Most people never looked past the surface. A waiter approached hesitantly. His smile looked carved from ice. "Tea or coffee, sir?" "Black coffee," the man answered smoothly. The waiter nodded, retreating quickly, though his eyes lingered once more as if trying to match the picture in his mind with the reality standing before him. When the boarding announcement echoed, the man rose. His steps were unhurried, his grip on the carry-on firm. The first-class line was short. 2 Chinese businessmen stood just ahead of him, their suits sharp, their watches heavy. Both turned to stare. One snorted. "This must be a mistake. There's no way he belongs here." The other laughed softly. "Wait until the flight attendants check his ticket. He'll be escorted back to economy soon enough." The black man said nothing, only stepped forward when his turn came. The gate agent scanned his boarding pass. The familiar tone chimed, "First class boarding. Seat 1A." The businessmen's faces froze, their half-smiles suspended in disbelief. The cabin of first class welcomed him with understated luxury. Wide leather seats gleamed, ambient lights glowed softly, and fresh orchids stood delicately in glass vases. For many, it was a sanctuary. For him, it was another stage, one where prejudice wore expensive clothes and polite smiles. He stowed his bag in the overhead compartment. Across the aisle, a woman in a silk dress frowned. She leaned toward her husband, her voice sharp. "Why is he here? Did the airline make a mistake?" Her husband replied louder, deliberately audible. "Some people are shameless, always trying to climb where they don't belong." 2 other passengers nodded in quiet agreement. One pressed the call button. A flight attendant arrived quickly, her practiced smile wavering. The man who had pressed the button gestured toward the black passenger. "Check his ticket. He doesn't belong here. This is ridiculous." The attendant turned to him, eyes apologetic. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass again?" Without hesitation, he handed it over. She scanned it with her handheld device. The beep was immediate. "Confirmed. Seat 1A, first class." Her cheeks flushed pink. "It's correct," she murmured, handing it back. Skeptical glances darted around the cabin. Someone muttered, "Machines can be fooled." Another shook his head. "The airline is lowering its standards." The black man seated himself calmly. He fastened his seatbelt, adjusted his jacket, and gazed straight ahead, unbothered on the outside. Inside, he felt the familiar sting, not of insults themselves, but of expectation. They expected him to fail, to stumble, to reveal himself as the fraud they believed him to be. He had lived beneath that expectation all his life. The cabin door remained open as the final passengers boarded. Each new arrival carried with them another ripple of tension. The hum of rolling luggage wheels, the snap of seatbelts, the murmur of small talk, all layered into an atmosphere thick with unease. A middle-aged man walked past, glaring openly, his smile thin and cruel. "Soon enough," he muttered under his breath, just loud enough to sting. A young woman quickly lifted her phone, the screen glowing as she discreetly snapped a photo of him. The flash of judgment, preserved forever. The chief flight attendant walked by, his sharp eyes sweeping the cabin. He paused briefly at seat 1A, offered a courteous nod, and moved on. It was nothing out of the ordinary, but enough to make nearby passengers shift uncomfortably. Why, they wondered, did this man deserve acknowledgement? The black man nodded back faintly. Both men understood the unspoken rules of the sky. Calmness was the undercurrent that kept everything afloat. The cabin filled steadily. A man wearing a gold watch dropped into seat 1C. He leaned across the aisle, his voice tight, balanced between politeness and hostility. "Listen, friend, I don't want trouble, but this cabin has standards. If there's an issue with your ticket, you should handle it now, before the crew closes the doors. The black man turned his head. His eyes were steady, his voice even. "My ticket is valid. There's no issue." The man in 1C smirked, leaning back with a scoff. His fingers drummed against the armrest, as if counting down to a scene he felt certain was coming. A flight attendant appeared with a tray of champagne, glasses catching the cabin lights. She hesitated when she reached row 1. For a heartbeat, she seemed uncertain whom to serve first. Finally, she smiled stiffly. "Would you like champagne, sir?" The black man smiled politely. "Just water, thank you." She nodded, relief flickering briefly in her expression. From seat 1C, a soft laugh slipped out, derisive, cutting. An announcement crackled through the cabin, a minor technical delay before departure. Minutes stretched like elastic, filling with whispers. Passengers grew restless. "Why is he still here?" someone whispered harshly. "This isn't charity," another muttered. "Send him back to economy and let us travel in peace," a third said louder. The air thickened with their words. Still, the black man sat unmoving, his gaze fixed toward the cockpit, as if tethered to some anchor invisible to the rest of them. Memories stirred. Shanghai, where security detained him half an hour for a random check. Shenzhen, where a business partner questioned whether he had real investors behind him. Guangzhou, where dinner guests chuckled that his Mandarin accent sounded strange. Each memory was a pebble in his shoe, annoying, uncomfortable, but never enough to halt his stride. He had always walked on. A child passed by with his mother, wide eyes staring. "Mama," the boy whispered in pure, innocent Mandarin. "He looks like someone from the movies." The mother tugged her son away, embarrassed, but offered the black man a nervous smile. He returned it with the faintest nod. Small moments like that had often salvaged entire days. At last, the final passengers trickled in. The cabin felt dense, as though the air itself pressed against skin. A passenger pressed the call button again. When the attendant arrived, the man spoke bluntly. "If he doesn't leave, I'll write directly to airline leadership. First-class customers have a right to standards." Several others murmured in agreement. The flight attendant glanced at the black man, then back at the passengers. Her eyes flickered, caught between protocol and pressure. "Sir, I'm very sorry for the inconvenience, but—" He raised a hand, his voice calm, unyielding. "My ticket is valid. I am in my rightful seat." The attendant nodded, retreating quietly. Some battles could not be won by procedure, only by truth. And the truth was simple. A valid ticket is a valid ticket. The cabin sank into a strange silence. The black man could hear his own heartbeat, steady as his watch ticking softly on his wrist. He adjusted his posture, exhaled slowly. Somewhere ahead, behind the cockpit door, switches clicked, papers rustled. Pilots exchanged clipped words. Outside, the night sky loomed black, the runway lights glowing like beads strung across the ground. Then came the faint creak of hinges. The front cabin door opened. A figure appeared. The captain, his uniform crisp, shoulders marked with 4 gold stripes. His eyes swept the cabin, practiced, seasoned. Passengers straightened, anticipation crackling. This, they thought, was the moment order would be restored. But the captain did not turn to them. He stepped directly to seat 1A, paused, and bowed his head respectfully. "Welcome aboard, sir," he said in clear Mandarin, his voice warm, carrying weight. "It is an honor to have you on this flight." For a heartbeat, silence reigned. The whispers evaporated. The stares softened into confusion, disbelief, shame. The black man inclined his head in return, calm as ever, as if both men were enacting a ritual they knew well. The quiet acknowledgement of power not yet revealed. The captain's greeting lingered like a low bell through first class, a tone that didn't name ranks or reveal titles, yet quietly rearranged the room. A few passengers who'd been leaning forward fell back into their seats. Others raised their phones to craft messages that began with, "You won't believe what just happened on my flight." The black man in 1A didn't move beyond a steady breath, fingers loose on the armrests, posture composed as if the aircraft had finally slipped into its proper lane in the sky. The chief flight attendant returned for final checks, step precise, expression even. He paused half a beat at 1A, nothing showy, just enough to signal respect, then continued. Across the aisle, the man with the gold watch in 1C watched that pause with tight-lipped irritation, the way a trader watches an unexpected curve on a graph. 2 rows back, the woman in the silk dress pretended to read the menu, gaze skating over lines she didn't absorb. Pushback came with a soft nudge. The jet rolled, its windows turning runway lights into a slow river of beads. Announcements in Mandarin and then English eased through the cabin. Weather, flight time, the small apology for the slight delay. Beneath those words ran the same current as the captain's earlier greeting. "We've got this." Engines rose. The aircraft gathered itself, the runway unfurled. Gravity pressed everyone into cushions until the city fell away and the sky accepted them. Disdain is harder to perform at 30,000 feet, but not impossible. When seatbelt chimes went dark, the gold watchman thumbed his call button and then pretended it had been accidental. The woman in silk alternated complaints. Air too cool, then too warm, then too dry. A businessman who'd muttered the word charity at the gate began drafting a tidy list in a notebook. Crew hesitant. Uncomfortable atmosphere. Standards compromised. Service began as ritual. Hot towels, the whisper of linen, porcelain set down with care, teas recited like a miniature atlas. When the purser reached 1A, he set the towel gently. "If you need anything," he said in calm Mandarin, pitched for privacy, "press the call button. I'll come myself." "Thank you," 1A replied, in Mandarin, fluent enough to turn 2 nearby heads. The gold watchman made a non-committal sound as though Mandarin emerging from that voice had bumped an axis inside his head. Appetizers came, a delicate salad touched with citrus, a small dish of pickled vegetables that snapped clean under the teeth. The woman in silk aimed her phone at the plate for a photo she didn't take. The man in 1A ate without appetite but with intention. Ritual, he knew, keeps a cabin stable even when people don't. The first bumps arrived as the bowls were cleared, modest, insistent. The seatbelt sign chimed. The plane lifted one shoulder, then the other, found calmer air. Cutlery trembled against china. The purser braced the cart with one practiced hand, giving the room a model for stillness. The gold watchman seized his moment. He pressed the call button again and assembled a courteous smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Earlier," he told the purser loudly enough for witnesses, "I raised a question about seating appropriateness. I would like written confirmation that you recorded my concern." He addressed the air just above 1A, as though eye contact might concede a point he refused to grant. "The concern was addressed," the purser said, voice even. "All passengers are correctly seated." "I'm not asking for resolution," the gold watchman said, jaw tight. "I'm asking for accountability." A small murmur moved through the cabin like a draft under a door. The woman in silk turned a page she hadn't read. The notebook man penned another line. "Poor handling of feedback." The man in 1A lifted his water, took a measured sip, and set the glass down. He'd spent years making rooms easier for other people. Speaking first, paying first, smiling first so tension had somewhere to go. Tonight he kept that effort for himself. When the turbulence tapered and the sign blinked off, service resumed. Steam rose from bowls. Scallion and ginger drifted in thin, comforting threads. Lacquered sauces caught the light. The man in 1A took in the warmth on his face and tasted slowly, thinking not of the stairs, but of the roots he'd traced in this country. Meetings that began with appraisal and ended with trust. factory floors where he learned the names of parts in dialects never printed on menus, trains thudding past midnight through cities where strangers were kind because kindness was ordinary. Building here, he knew, required patience to outlast first impressions and the spine to hold still while they broke. Midway through the main course, a young man in row 2 raised his phone and his voice. "Is the Wi-Fi working?" he asked no one in particular, eyes flitting toward 1A. "I'm trying to post. My app keeps freezing." The purser appeared, steadied by oceans of repetition. "The browser portal is most reliable during handoffs," he said. "Apps can lag." "It's just—" The young man drew a breath big enough for an audience. "People should know what happened at the gate. We can't pretend it didn't." 2 rows back, agreement hummed, tentative, hungry. The woman in silk lifted her brows, relieved not to be alone. The gold watchman set his fork down, readying both hands for a debate. "You're free to use your device," the purser said, "but please avoid photographing other guests without consent. That's policy." His glance touched 1A for half a beat, an unspoken promise, then moved on. Dessert arrived like a small argument against the ugliness of earlier. Fruit cut into tidy jewels, a sesame custard that trembled like light. A tart glazed so cleanly it reflected cabin bulbs. The woman in silk declined as if sweetness itself were suspect. The gold watch accepted coffee and let it cool untouched, steam rising and thinning between him and his grievance. The captain's voice returned once plates were cleared. "We've reached cruising altitude," he said, tone gentle and exact. "Weather ahead looks favorable. Thank you for your patience at departure." A pause as thin as thread. "Our crew is here to ensure your comfort. If you have concerns, please address them respectfully and directly. We serve all guests equally." No names, just wait. The room's edges softened. The notebook paused mid-stroke. The gold watchman exhaled like a balloon, choosing voluntary deflation over a pop. Row 2 stared at a half-drafted post and backspaced a line too pleased with itself. The purser floated past again. "More water for you, sir?" he asked 1A. "Yes. Thank you." 3 seconds. A treaty written in tone. The cabin entered the long middle distance of flight, the quiet domesticity of muted movies, blankets tugged to chins, engines knitting time. Conflict didn't vanish. It condensed into sidelong looks with less voltage, conversations that broke before they could harden into tales. The man in 1A reclined a notch and unfolded the route map on the back of the menu. Lines threaded across China like stitching. Beijing to Guangzhou, to Kunming, to Harbin, seams he'd helped pull taut with planning, capital, and the faith that a thing could be built without asking permission from old stories about who belonged where. "Tea?" the purser asked softly. "Longjing?" "Yes." The porcelain was thin enough to sing when the cup met the saucer. Steam rose, fresh, grassy, a hillside memory. He wrapped his hands around the cup. Warmth traveled into places the aircraft's hygienic cold couldn't touch. He noticed the gold watch watching the tea. Curiosity opened a small hole in pride. 1A lifted the cup and let a private pleasure be public. The first sip steadied the room by a fraction. Minutes gathered. Row 2 slid the phone into a pocket. The woman in silk closed her eyes and kept them closed. Her husband folded his arms, broadcasting sleep he hadn't earned yet. Somewhere in that hush, a chime pealed near the galley, a handset whispered, and the purser nodded as if a long-traveling decision had finally arrived. "Sir," he said at 1A's shoulder, voice pitched for a single listener. When convenient, the captain would like a brief word in the forward galley. No urgency, no theater. The invitation was the message. 1A set down his tea, stood, and stepped into the aisle. It felt wider now, not because aluminum had shifted, but because minds had. Passing 1C, the gold watchman started to speak and thought better of it. Row 2 straightened as one, like a classroom waiting for an exam. The woman in silk opened her eyes, her gaze tipped toward curiosity. The galley was the tidy nerve center of flight, sealed drawers, folded cloths, a checklist taped beside a small clock. The captain stood hatless, the lines in his face a map of crossings made safely. Up close, his voice shed the intercom's polish for human weight. "Thank you for your patience," he said, "and your courtesy." "You have a plane to fly," 1A replied. "Courtesy should flow to you." "I have a plane and a cabin," the captain said. Tonight, the cabin needed reminding about our priorities. He measured the next line. "You've been a consistent supporter of those priorities." No announcement, no disclosure. A rope tossed across water. 1A nodded. "Your crew handled it well." "As discussed," the captain answered. The phrase hung between them like a fresh seal. "If you require anything, ask directly." "Tea is perfect," 1A said. "Thank you, Captain." He returned through an aisle that seemed to oblige him. Back at 1A, the tea had cooled and changed. Good tea always does. Quieter, greener. He drank anyway. Things can change temperature and remain themselves. The seatbelt sign winked on over light chop. Belts clicked. The woman in silk reached for her husband's hand without looking. The gold watch stared straight ahead with the practiced blankness of someone trying on neutrality. Row 2 watched clouds pass like students trying to transcribe weather. The bumps eased. A rumor of apology seemed to move through the rows, not voiced, not owed, simply present, like the careful way people pass a door after someone closes it kindly. The purser appeared once more and set a small white envelope on 1A's armrest. "For you," he said. The paper felt heavier than it looked. 1A didn't open it yet. Some messages are better saved for touchdown. Time expanded and then forgot itself. Cabin light stepped down a shade. Beyond the window, China unrolled as darkness. Towns like distant Braille, a river looping back on itself, a ridge asleep under a blank sheet. In the glass, his reflection hovered faint and legible. He examined it with the same frankness he reserved for mirrors and boardrooms. Posture, breath, readiness. "You're all right," the reflection seemed to say. "You are where you belong." The purser returned with one last question, folded small as a napkin. "After landing," he said, "would you be available for a brief greeting? It would be helpful." "Yes," 1A said. His voice carried farther than the two of them, just far enough for the row that had wanted spectacle and was learning to prefer resolution. Outside, a seam of starlight opened between clouds like a zipper tugged down. Inside, first class exhaled as one organism. And somewhere between outside and in, the part no camera ever captures, the story settled into its final shape, one step from its true name, waiting for the ground to speak it. The descent began with a soft chime and a small tilt, the city rising to meet the aircraft like a dark sea stitched with light. Seatbacks straightened, belts clicked, shades moved by an inch. In 1A, the black man set his empty cup on the tray and watched the runway lamps unspool into patient pearls. Wheels met ground, reversers sighed, speed bled away. As the plane turned toward the gate, he felt a tension collecting again, a tide that had gone out and now returned. If there's a reckoning, he thought, let it happen on the ground. The captain came on the intercom, voice easy but precise. "Welcome to Shanghai. For safety, remain seated until the seatbelt sign is off. One operational note. The first row will disembark briefly ahead of general deplaning. Thank you for your cooperation." In 1C, the man with the gold watch twitched. Across the aisle, the woman in silk retied her scarf with a firmness that looked like denial. The seatbelt sign pinged off. The forward door opened with a gentle thump, and the chief flight attendant appeared, posture composed. "Sir," he said to 1A, "this way, please." He stood. The aisle held. No one leapt toward the bins. Space opened as if the cabin itself were making room. The purser led him 2 steps forward to the door, where the captain waited in full uniform. For a breath, the 3 of them formed a neat triangle, flight's small geometry. Then the captain gestured toward the bridge. The jet bridge glowed under utilitarian light. A line of ground staff stood in quiet formation. Station supervisor, ops manager, 2 mechanics in reflective vests, a catering lead with a hairnet tucked under a cap. They bowed in unison, not deep, but unmistakably respectful. The manager stepped forward. "Welcome home, Chairman," she said in clear Mandarin. The word dropped into the cabin like a pin in a cathedral. Small sound, vast echo. Heads turned, mouths opened and closed. The woman in silk's hands stilled. The gold watch stared at the carpet as if it had offered him new scripture. "Thank you," he answered in Mandarin, not lingering on the title. "How was the run?" "On time after departure," the manager said. "Maintenance corrected the galley latch you flagged. Guangzhou Catering received your notes. Training is ready whenever you are." "Good," he said. "Please thank the night crew." A clatter behind him. Someone dropped a luggage handle. He turned back toward the doorway. The cabin was full of faces doing hurried arithmetic, subtracting certainty, adding possibility. He could have let the door close and left the lesson as rumor. Instead, he stepped half a pace back to the threshold. "Captain," he asked, "may I speak 1 sentence?" "1 sentence," the captain agreed. He faced the passengers. He did not raise his voice. "Thank you for flying with us tonight," he said. "I hope the rest of your journey is peaceful." No rebuke, no victory lap. Yet it landed with the weight of choice, mercy shaped by restraint. He inclined his head, turned, and walked into the bridge. The purser followed. At the doorway, the gold watch hovered, a student unsure whether he had permission to approach. "Sir," he said, not quite steady, "I misjudged you. I'm sorry." "I appreciate your words," the man in 1A replied. "Keep them for the next person who doesn't fit your picture." The gold watch bowed and sat. In the bridge, the ops manager matched his pace. Through a small window, he saw the ramp's choreography, a fuel truck under a wing, cones lifted and set, a loader creeping toward the hold, wands carving sentences into the dark. At the terminal door, another formation waited. 2 from training, 1 from legal, a woman from customer care with a tiny enamel plane on her lanyard. "Chairman," the customer care lead said, "several complaints were logged by seat number during boarding. The purser filed his report. Do you want summaries tonight?" "Tomorrow," he said. "Give the passengers tonight." He signed 2 maintenance forms, initialed the catering note, shook the mechanic's hands. Titles never fixed a latch or sharpened a knife edge. People did. He thanked them for the work that kept the promise of flight from becoming only marketing. The private door opened to a modest reception area, a kettle steaming on a tray, a simple sign that read Qingyun Air, Operations. The legal assistant handed him the envelope the purser had delivered. Inside, a note in the captain's hand. "Your presence changed the angle of the room. Thank you for letting the room do the rest." He tucked it into his jacket. "Please send a thank you to the crew," he said. "No names, just gratitude." Footsteps quickened behind them. The woman in silk arrived, breath controlled. Security glanced for instruction. He shook his head, let her speak. "I owe you an apology," she said in careful Mandarin. "Not because of your title, because of my behavior." "Apology accepted," he said after a small, honest pause. "Make it count by helping the next person board more easily than you helped me." She nodded and returned to the public corridor where apology might become habit. Inside, maps covered the walls like constellations. A whiteboard listed simulator slots and training rotations. A smaller board tracked cabin refreshers, consent and photography, conflict de-escalation, dialect basics for greetings. The operations manager briefed briskly. A hiring class completing in Chengdu, a route proposal waiting on municipal signatures, one crew member recommended for promotion. He asked 3 questions, approved one change, declined another, and deferred a third until he'd seen the "Get some rest," the manager said. "You've flown enough rooms for one night." "Rooms are lighter than airplanes," he answered, and took the side exit to the curb. Outside, the airport's conditioned air met the city's humidity and made a thin fog in between. A company sedan waited. The driver opened the door with the gentleness reserved for both metal and stories. As the car pulled away, the runway fell behind like a long paragraph finally ending. He let the streetlights flicker across the headliner and thought of the cabin. How fury cooled into confusion, confusion into quiet, quiet into something that might, if fed, become care. First class had never been about a price, he reminded himself. It was a promise that everyone aboard would be treated as if they belonged in the sky. Some had kept that promise tonight. Some had learned how. At a red light, he drafted one message to the operations group. Commend tonight's crew. Add a refresher on consent and photography to next month's service training. Remind everyone that hospitality isn't a script. It's a stance. He sent it and let the sedan carry him into a city that had doubted him and hired him, resisted him and partnered him, misnamed him and, sometimes, named him rightly. The driver turned onto a quieter road lined with plane trees. Tomorrow would bring schedules and decisions. Tonight brought a simpler inventory. A door opened, a bow offered, a sentence chosen, and a cabin learning, slowly, stubbornly, finally, to fly a little fairer.